Hi everyone, and welcome back to Questioning Behaviour. As always, my name is Sarah, and I am here with the indelible Merle van den Akker.
Indelible, all right.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying. You're the dummy that don't.
And today on this episode, we're going to be talking to Nick Mishkin, who I know through his Twitter feed. He has the Twitter page Behaviour 2020. So it's great to put a name and face to the Twitter profile. And we're going to be talking about behavioral science within the world of sales, which seems in theory to make sense. Seems like there should be a lot to talk about, but I'm coming in with pretty much no knowledge whatsoever. What about you, my friend? How are you on sales and behavioral science? Do you know anything about that?
Zero. The only behavior I associate with salespeople is that I find them incredibly annoying. Like, I understand that they need to sell me something, but they never do so at the right time in the right way. I find them incredibly obnoxious, which is a bit harsh, but maybe Nick can change my mind. And obviously, you know, these people work very, very long hours, very often in the companies that they work for, which we've also seen with customer service. They are outsourced, which is a very strange exploitative business model. So, we'll just see what's going on there. But for me, you know, having behavioral science in sales, given that sales are very human-oriented, human-centered, it would make a lot of sense. But I don't know how much behavioral science is actually applied in sales. I don't know if, you know, Thinking Fast and Slow and Cialdini are like mandatory reading as soon as you move on to a sales program. Not a clue, honestly.
Right. Well, considering our knowledge is pretty scarce, that's why we do this podcast. Let's jump straight into the interview and meet Nick, who can definitely tell us a lot more about sales and behavioral science than we can tell you right now.
Let's do it. All right, so Nick, please tell the crowd, who are you, what do you do, and how did you get there?
Absolutely. So my name is Nick Mishkin. I am a master's student at IDC Herzliya studying behavioral economics. And the way I got here was I majored in economics at the University of Pennsylvania. And then I worked in technology sales for 7 years. During my career, I had times of great success, but also times of failure. And I recognize that those times of failure can be attributed to one thing specifically, and that's a deficiency in emotional IQ.
Oh.
So to correct myself, I started studying behavioral economics, so that when I speak with customers, I can connect with them on an emotional level, a level that transcends the typical business interaction. And I just became fascinated. I started listening to podcasts, started reading articles, started reading blogs. And then when COVID happened and I lost my job, I was like, great, this is an opportunity to...
I lost my job. Great. I'm like, not my initial reaction, but for the sake of the story, let's keep going.
Right. I mean, it's all about how you frame it, right? For another behavioral economics concept. So the way I framed it was like, hey, it's not it's not losing my job. It's an opportunity to dedicate myself to the field and help people close the gap between human interactions and business interactions.
That's one hell of a change in framing. One hell of a change.
Framing's a powerful tool.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So, I mean, I'm very happy to be speaking to a fellow economist. I feel like we're outnumbering Merle, so I feel very, very good about that. But kind of interesting. I've never heard of the sort of the way into behavioral economics, like through this channel of emotional intelligence. So what was it about? Because, you know, I mean, my initial reaction when I think about economists is pretty much devoid of emotion in the models and devoid of that human component. So what was it? What was the link for you that you were able to get from behavioral economics that helped develop this sort of understanding of emotional intelligence?
Yeah, so I don't know how business necessarily gets done in Europe, but in the United States, it can be very robotic, right? As a sales professional, I was memorizing scripts. I was taking notes during calls. I had to actively listen. I had to think about the sales cycle, make sure we had next steps. So I was just constantly thinking about these things, and I ended up making myself crazy. I was like, I'm not focusing on the most important thing, and that's the fact that I'm talking to a human being.
Sure.
So when I realized that, I was like, okay, it's time to study human psychology and correct this in myself.
I see. So, I mean, are there any good examples of how, an insight from behavioral economics, behavioral science changed the way you approached human interaction?
Yeah, so I think the secret to human behavior is that people judge reality based on reference points.
That's
right.
fair.
So we talk about anchoring in behavioral economics, and I think that's probably one of them, if not the most powerful tool. And what most people don't recognize is that your clients are constantly comparing your solution to many different anchors. And one of the most powerful ones are expectations. So before your client even hops on the phone, they have expectations for how your solution is going to solve their problem, what your solution does, how much it costs. And it could be completely wrong, depending on the information that client has. So as a sales professional, it's very important to uncover what those expectations are as early as possible. Say, like when you get on the phone, why are you taking this call? Or what are your expectations for this solution? How do you see it working in your day-to-day? Get that out on the table, and then you could start comparing your solution to their expectations, which is going to be best for the customer because it's going to help them make an easier decision down the road. And it also is going to help them discover more about what's best for their company. And it's good for you because you're no longer shooting in the dark. You actually have a comparison to make throughout the sales process.
Right. Super interesting.
I'm quite curious. So you've left sales, you've gone into behavioral economics education. Do you think you'll go back into sales, or are you like, nah?
I do not think so. It is a grind. I tip my hat to all the salespeople out there. I mean, there's so many things you're constantly thinking about, especially the ones who have to prospect and find their own leads and cold call, but also take meetings and walk the customer through the entire sales cycle. It's grueling, and I think I could be more. I think I could do more for humanity, training salespeople in behavioral economics as opposed to being an individual contributor again.
All right.
Wow.
So back into sales, but not as you used to be.
Exactly.
Okay.
With a twist.
Sales with a twist.
Fascinating. So why decide to do a master's? Like what was it about? Was it just that you felt that you couldn't learn enough from the sort of resources that are out there in terms of like podcasts and books? What made you jump back to education?
So I've always loved school, and it's been a while since my undergrad. It's been a while. I love learning, love the community, the atmosphere, the less stressful life, depending on, I guess, what you're doing in school. But as I told you before, sales is extremely stressful.
Yeah, sure.
So just the opportunity to come back to school. When I was training myself in behavioral economics, my biggest resource were podcasts. And
you're welcome.
Yes, podcasts are the best. I love what you guys are doing.
So
And
humble.
yes, I definitely stumbled across your podcast during my training. Another one I stumbled across was The Brainy Business with Melina Palmer,
Yeah, she's
if
great.
you've heard of it.
She's very great.
She is great. And she's great at comparing day-to-day business to behavioral economics, which is exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah.
So I started listening to her podcast, became so fascinated with the material that I actually reached out to her and said, hey, like, would love to understand your story and learn more about what you do in the behavioral economics field. And on our call, she sensed my excitement and suggested that I look into master's programs. And I followed her advice to the T.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. No. Sometimes you need that little friendly nudge in the right direction. I think that's one of the only reasons why I'm doing a PhD is because someone said, have you considered doing this? And I'm like, no, I didn't. And now look at me. Almost at the end. Yeah.
True. Almost done. Desperate to be done. It's not really selling the PhD. Let's step off this one.
Yes. Okay. So we've already sort of, I guess, glance towards the future of sort of what you want to do when you've sort of been rebirthed from your masters back into the world of employment. Sorry, it's a gross metaphor.
It's visual. I'll give you that.
So, I mean, is this sort of the giving sales or people who work in sales training in sort of behavioral science, behavioral insights, applying it to their own life, is that something that just doesn't exist right now?
Yeah, I mean, I can only talk to my personal experience, but I've never talked to a salesperson and I've never gone through a human psychology program while doing sales. And to me, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, we're talking to humans all day long, back-to-back phone calls. And I'm sure this applies to tons of different professional jobs. But like, why aren't we studying human psychology if all my interactions are with humans? It just doesn't make sense. And I just realized how much I was benefiting from understanding psychology. And yeah, it's just so applicable.
Yeah. It always seems silly that no one's done it before. It's so natural.
Is that entirely true, though? So, I mean, I've read work by Cialdini. I mean, I do have to admit this is a long time ago, but doesn't Robert Cialdini have quite a lot of work out which is like really super applicable to sales? Or am I just remembering this wrong? Like, this can't be something entirely new, right?
No, absolutely. And actually, Cialdini's influence is one of the reasons I got into behavioral economics. So I started reading that and I was like, okay, I'm in. I think it's more the emphasis, right? Like, I had to go and read the book on my own.
Sure.
I should have been told to read that book years ago. We should have had trainers come in and actually teach us about psychology and behavioral economics. So I think that it's not a new thing. However, there needs to be more of an emphasis on that type of education.
That seems fair. Okay. Yeah, I can definitely see that. So, for my understanding, because I know very little about sales, I mean, to be quite honest, I'm a very shabby salesperson. It's actually quite embarrassing. But what does it currently look like? Because I understand that you want to apply behavioral science to it, actually improve it so that it actually contains a central view of the fact that you're dealing with a human. Seems legitimate to me. But what is it currently? Because I thought sales training would be quite persuasive in and of itself, which would by default, but maybe that's my default and my wrong interpretation, be quite human focused anyway, because you have to identify someone's needs and desires, right, to actually make a successful sale. Or am I just completely in the wrong here?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think it depends on the company. I've worked at mostly startups, except for 1 year at iHeartRadio, right out of college. Okay. But so in this startup world, I mean, everything's like fast pace, right? We're trying to grow this company. They're backed by VCs and the salespeople are bringing in the revenue. So it's very fast paced. At least from my experience, I have mostly been told to memorize scripts, to mostly educational materials based on the sales cycle. So when I think it's where your focus goes.
Sure.
and again, it's what you're emphasizing it. So at least in my mind, I was focused on the sales cycle and all these different materials rather than the human connection. And this could have been, I've seen this across the board. Like, I can't be the only one who has gone through this. Like, I know that for a fact, but I'm sure there are other people who maybe have natural empathy, at least more than me, or a naturally high emotional IQ. And they were maybe able to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go off the sales script and actually have a conversation with this person. It was harder for me to do that. And I just needed to nudge myself into raising my emotional IQ.
Sure. Right. That makes sense. But then, so these scripts that you were taught to adhere to, at least, as a default, were they written in a particular way that you'd be like, they are completely devoid of any type of behavioral insight? As in, if a psychologist would look at this, they just start crying? Or were they written, I mean, maybe not literally, but like, were they written in a way where you're just like, this is just not great? Like, would the scripts in and of themselves already benefit from a behavioral scientist looking through them and just being like, just rewrite it. Just have a professional, like a behavioral professional rewrite it. Would that already be enough, or were these scripts actually pretty bang on?
Yeah, I think the scripts were good.
Okay.
I don't think that a behavioral economist would read it, or a psychologist and would cry after reading it. But I think it's more the fact that it existed in the first place, and that I was focusing on the script and not on the person. So whenever there's a script or something you think is required on you, it's gonna narrow your creativity.
Sure.
In any capacity. So I don't think it's necessarily, first of all, the scripts were long. They probably were way longer than they needed to be. So there wasn't that much room for improv. As far as the cold call, so that was I'm mostly referring to the pitch script,
sure.
Right? We have a deck that we're presenting to the client, and this script covers the slides and kind of gives us background on each slide, right? If I'm just reading off the script, well, I sound like a robot, and I'm not really asking the customer questions, and I'm not making it unique to the customer. Mm-hmm. We also had a cold call script, right? When we're calling in a client, cold calls are very difficult, right? You're disrupting someone's day. No one likes to receive a cold call. You have 15 seconds to get this person's attention. And I think there are ways to develop empathy in that short amount of time. I'm actually doing some of my own research on that.
Oh, cool.
Apparently, when you use nouns over verbs, you give off more sympathy. So when you're calling someone, I think saying something like, "Hey, we're both professionals here, just trying to make it in this world, or trying to make it in business."
Sounds very American. Don't try that in the Netherlands. Won't work.
Don't try that in the Netherlands. Something along those lines, where you're actually building a connection using nouns. Hey, like, we're on the same team here. We're both. There's more than just like business going on here. This is all things I'm testing.
Okay.
And
I'm getting suspicious of that. If a random person tells me, it's like, we're doing this for the both of us, I'm like, I don't even know you. Like, no, I hate it.
It's why it's so difficult.
Yeah.
But 15 seconds to build an emotional connection is a huge task.
Yeah. But I guess if you're doing it often enough, there is definitely some opportunities there for experimentation, I guess. I mean, is that part of the type of training you want to deliver, of sort of empowering sales people to apply behavioral science in their job, of, actually thinking like a scientist, of saying, okay, I'm going to take this approach and try and evaluate to see whether or not it works, or, trying to match the approach to the person and sort of think about it more iteratively as a scientist would? Or is it about just equipping people with, the tools and letting them decide for themselves? I mean, are you teaching a method, or are you going to be providing tools, I guess is the question.
So I am providing tools. However, I think the most important thing is that, first of all, these salespeople are thinking too much already. At least that's where I came from, right? Like as I told you, or as I said previously, I was focused on scripts. We're focused on note taking. We're focused on the sales cycle, getting next steps. What do I say next? I have to ask the right questions. Like, it's just exhausting talking about this right now. I'm exhausting myself. And I just think that salespeople need to approach the call at a different level. Like, when you're making a cold call, rather than think to yourself, hey, I'm going to get a meeting out of this call, be like, hey, I'm going to make this person's day. Right. I think just by saying that, you're going to excite yourself. You're going to come off with a much happier, warm tone. And also, you're just going to come at it, not at a business robotic way. You're like, hey, I'm going to make this person's day. Like, I'm going to form this emotional bond. And just by starting from that base, your conversations are automatically going to be more organic. And I think you could do that throughout the entire sales cycle.
Yeah. So self-experimentation, really, then. Applying behavioral science to yourself to get better outcomes, like in your performance, right? Is that?
Yeah. I think, we'll talk, I think also from a meditative standpoint, I work a lot with meditation and training your mind as well as your emotions. So I think all that is stems. All that will help in sales. Mm-hmm. I just want to just change the mindset. Like, it's not about win or lose, zero sum game. You make the sale, you don't make the sale. It's hey, I'm talking to a human being. Like, let's connect as human beings. I just think your mindset needs to change, and thinking about it from a emotional standpoint can really set the course for the entire process.
Yeah. And there could be additional benefits in terms of, potentially higher retention rates of people in sales jobs. I mean, you sort of alluded to earlier that there seems to be quite a lot of burnout or people not sticking around in these jobs long term. Do you think that type of mindset is contributing to that phenomenon?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's very prevalent in the startup space, again, where you have VCs who are expecting huge revenue increases. But again, it depends on the person. Some people can really handle it. And some people, if they came with this type of attitude, would be super helpful.
Okay. So potentially really exciting spillover effects. Then it's not just about, optimizing each individual interaction between a salesperson and potential customer, but also actually improving well-being of people who work in sales as well. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, and to your definition, right? Optimal. That from a behavioral science standpoint, that's subjective, right? What is optimal in a sales call? Like, what are you trying to get out of the sales call? And instead of saying, hey, I'm going to make the sale, or I'm going to transition this client to the next stage in the sales cycle, saying, hey, like, we're going to have an awesome conversation. I'm going to learn about this person. I watched this great TV show. I'm going to find some way to bring it up. Like those kind of interesting tidbits. Though, if you set yourself on those objectives, you're going to get a much brighter outcome, and I think you're going to make more sales as a result.
Okay, fantastic.
I'm not sure if I'm remotely convinced by this, especially the cold calling.
I love it.
No, I can be a devil's advocate. The thing is just, I have a massive hatred of. I'm not to offend, but like, I'm almost autistic about this. Just like my dad, who actually is, and it's just, I don't like random interruptions in my day. So if someone is cold calling me for God knows what reason, you're already 10-0 behind. And I think if you're then trying to like forge an emotional connection with me whilst my current mental state is intense annoyance, like you're not gonna, like, I don't think there's enough behavioral science in the world to fix that one. So what can you even do about people like me? Because we do exist.
Yes, you're going to be a very tough person to get the next meeting, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to have to catch you at a very positive time. Something that's also interesting, I think a salesperson needs to know about, and everyone should, is the fundamental attribution error, right? From psychology, that the role that environment plays in people's decision making.
Mm-hmm.
So if I catch you, you just missed the train today, you're running late. It's a really cloudy day outside. Chances are I might not get the meeting with you. The odds are not in my favor.
Nope.
So the more, that's where the more people you call, the better, and where the numbers game comes into play. There's actually a really interesting study out of Wharton that shows for in college acceptance,
Mm-hmm.
a social applicant has a better chance of getting accepted into the university on sunnier days.
Huh.
And it just mind-boggling, because it's like, okay, the environment is basically dictating who gets into a certain college or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that could be applied in sales. So when you don't, like, it's really easy to get down on yourself in sales. Like if I didn't, if a call didn't go well, or I cold called and the person on the other side was very upset, I might take that personally.
Sure.
But the reality is, a person could have had, again, like a bad day, could have been cloudy. There's so many factors that could have contributed to that call not going well. And just having an understanding of that as a salesperson could be liberating and impactful in your own approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I do think, Sarah and I, because we're in PhD programs and have been in master programs in the UK, and like the chance of us being able to apply on a sunny day in the UK is essentially zero. So now I feel even better about my success rate, and so should Sarah.
Yeah, but I think you're right. This the attribution error. It's everywhere. And that sort of change in mindset can be super, super powerful. I mean, I guess the problem is that environment, especially in a sales call or a cold call, can be completely unobservable. Mm-hmm. If you've just got someone on the end of the phone, you don't know anything about their day, their context, where they're taking it. Maybe you can have some things that like time of day, or day of the week. Is that something that gets built into sales strategy, of trying to call people at the opportune time, or not at all? Is it just really just a numbers game? I'm imagining that. I don't know what. And this is another question. But what is the success rate for cold calling? Like, how many people do you need to call to actually get some positive or positive outcome from that endeavor?
I'm trying to think back about the numbers. It's definitely a low percent that turns when cold calls turn into meetings.
But then why
most
do
people
it?
don't even. It's still the best way. It's still the best way to get meetings. Emails. How many emails do these people do buyers get a day? It's tons. Cold call, you can also leave a voicemail. Honestly, we would cold call companies and say, it would be like, hey, like, who's the right person to talk to about this, right? We don't even know the right person. Like, just talking to the receptionist and asking who handles this, well, that's giving us information about the company. That's getting us to the right person. Sure. So there's so much strategy that goes into the cold call game. And then by the time you get to the right person, well, what do you say? A lot of the times people don't answer their phones. So when there's a very small percentage that even answer their phones. So you have to put that into account. But if you call the receptionist, and you say, hey, like leave a note for John. She leaves a note at John. He's like, okay, John now saw my company, right? That's like a touch point, we call it. Then I leave a voicemail. Here's my voice. Okay, then I send an email. That email is way more impactful now.
Sure.
Now that I've sent the note, you've heard my voice on a voicemail. LinkedIn voice notes,
oh god,
surprisingly powerful, right? Like, I mean, there's tons of ways.
What are you even selling by this stage? Like, I mean, I feel like if you called my company, for the listener, I don't have a company, but it would be nice. But if you were to call my company and my secretary, which I also don't have, but still it would be nice, picks up and then, it leaves me a note, and then you send me an email, and then you send me a LinkedIn voice note. Like, by this stage, you are stalking me. Like, I am not comfortable with this idea.
Now, there's a fine art between persistence. What's nice is that every company needs revenue, right? Every company has salespeople to bring in that revenue. If you are pretty high up at a company, you understand the grind of sales. And if someone's very persistent, like I've gotten meetings because I was so persistent, they're like, wow, like I respect that. I will take this meeting just because you were so persistent.
No, I will take this meeting to get rid of you. Maybe then you will finally leave me alone.
There are certainly people who do that as well.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's also part of redefining what the optimal outcome, right? If the optimal outcome of any interaction is to make a sale, or it's just, cost benefit analysis just to make enough money, then it doesn't really matter how you reach that outcome, whether or not it's annoying people until they give you their money, or whether or not it's charming people or persuading people. So I mean, if you change the outcome to have like a make someone's day, it changes the way you define success. It changes the way you play the game, and I guess the question is whether or not redefining the goal to be something more holistic, like, leaving people better off than you found them, does that then translate into more profitable? And I mean, is there research on that, or is that something that needs, I guess, more evidence to collect? Well, I'm interested.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I mean, just having that change of outcome. I haven't heard any evidence yet about whether you have an outcome based on emotions will make you more successful. I think it does. That's why I'm studying this. I also think something to point out is vulnerability. So at least in the United States, people are afraid to be vulnerable. They think it as a sign of weakness. And I think that translates in sales. Like, people are afraid to say, hey, I don't know. Those are three very powerful words. And I've listened to Brene Brown and read articles by her. Yeah. I encourage all listeners to check out her podcast. And it's funny because I was someone who thought being vulnerable showed weakness, but then she told me quite the opposite. It's actually, people really respect vulnerability. And my guess is if you embrace your vulnerability, right? Vulnerability is a human trait. You're showing your humanity when you admit vulnerability. I think that's going to come across to your clients, and I think it's going to have a positive effect.
I've always wondered with that vulnerability one, because I mean, it kind of depends on the examples that you're giving. Also, I'm not trying to go against Brene Brown, because the woman has clearly done a lot more research than I have, clearly. But it's just, so from personal experience, so not to be compared to academic research, it's just, if someone tells me, first of all, that they don't know, which is perfectly valid, because, no one is the fucking Britannica personified. And then, but that then afterwards they will look it up for me, or they will get back to me. To me, it's not necessarily an indication of vulnerability, but it's an indication of them having some type of investment in this conversation. Now, I mean, I do have to mention this was mostly teachers, because I'm a very annoying person to teach, because I always come up with questions that you can't possibly know an answer to. But they always got back to me, and especially, the week after, or whatever seminar or lecture afterwards. And then if they then came back to me, they're like, I looked this up, unless they're, multiple persons, I don't care. we looked this up and, we found this, and you might want to look at this specific research. If someone has actually actively remembered my question or remembered the conversation that they had with me and then puts in the effort and then actually gets back to me. I mean, this is almost such an investment, time and effort-wise, from their side that, by this stage, I almost feel like I should reciprocate. So if you then want to sell me something, I'll probably buy it. So this is how you trick me.
Yeah, and I think there's you also the idea behind vulnerability. It's an art between being the expert and being vulnerable, right? You want to come across as an expert. No one wants to buy from someone who doesn't know what they're like. If the reason salespeople exist is because the client isn't educated enough to buy the product on their own, right? They rely on a salesperson to guide them through the process.
Or maybe I just actively don't want it.
Or maybe, if you don't want it, then I'm assuming you're not on the phone with me, right?
Yeah. But
we're both wasting our time.
Yeah, you got to assume there's this information asymmetry. That's why there's this whole market out there to capitalize on that. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that it's an art between being the expert and showing vulnerability. And at least when I was in sales, being vulnerable as an asset just never occurred to me. I always wanted to come across as the expert. Of course, I said, I don't know, right? If I don't know something, I would say, I don't know, I'll get back to you, just like you referred to earlier. I think that's important because it means I'm invested. If I don't know something, I'm willing to get this information for you. But it also, just to think about vulnerability as an asset, again, going back to changing your mindset from the base and that changing the outcome. If you think about vulnerability, you're just going to come across as more human.
Yeah, that doesn't fair.
It's interesting. Have you done much reflecting on why you felt strongly about not wanting to show, a vulnerability like via emotion, whether it was in your job or with your clients or just to yourself? Have you reflected on that and come to some conclusions of where did that come from for you?
Yeah, and I think it is personal. Like I said, I'm sure there are tons of other people. Like I know for a fact there are a lot of other people who share similar experiences. I mean, from my standpoint, right, I was born in New York City, then I moved to Florida when I was 10 years old. But in school, it's always like, hey, like get good grades, go to a good college, then you'll get the good job, right? We've just been socially conditioned to kind of be the best, right? Like if you show weakness in school, you might not, you're weak. You're getting graded, right? Like you show weakness on a question, you're not going to get as good a grade. And so I think most of us, or at least in the United States, are brought up, hey, don't make mistakes. And when I went into the work world, that was my mentality. And I had to make a ton of mistakes in order to realize, hey, it's actually okay to make mistakes. In fact, it's human. In fact, people respect it. And when you admit vulnerabilities, you're showing courage. You're showing quite the opposite because you are actually going against the social conditioning that you were born into.
Yeah, powerful. Yeah, so I mean, in terms of making mistakes, I mean, we're all human, we're all fallible, it's inevitable. But I guess from your experience, from your research, what is the best way for people to learn from their mistakes? Like, what needs to be present for that mistake to actually close the loop and teach you something and help push you forward?
Yeah, so awareness, right? Understanding your own emotions, questioning your own behavior, analyzing your decisions. Hey, I did this. Why did I do that? I think is all very important. As many behavioral economics podcasts as I've listened to, and behavioral science and psychology, I've also listened to many on meditation and just becoming a better person. Some I recommend. I listen to the Sam Harris Waking Up app every single day. It's got some great daily meditations, theories, as well as lessons on stoicism, which I've been getting really into. Joe Dispenza talks about training your mind and basically priming yourself to go against those social shackles that you've been brought up with. Michael Singer, Untethered Soul, fantastic. It talks about quieting your mind and how you don't have to listen to your mind. I think he actually describes your mind as a roommate, and the most annoying roommate that you could ever have.
No, it's
and
not.
You're living with it every day.
No, I've had many worse roommates than my own mind. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Oh, and I was just gonna say, Peter Crone is also someone I admire. His interviews on the Aubrey Marcus podcast were pretty influential to me.
That's a solid list.
Yeah,
Huge
I've done a lot of training.
No, just where do you find the time is maybe the better question. But I'm quite curious. So again, playing a little devil's advocate, because apparently that's the role I've assigned to myself this episode. But I feel like, so what we've been through now. So you feel like the whole sales process is definitely lacking having the person that you're speaking with or having any type of humanity being put at the center. Okay, clear enough. Then you've also mentioned meditation, developing higher emotional intelligence, becoming a better person even. But then, very much what you see on the sales side is you've got scripts, you've got a very fast-paced environment, you've got targets that you need to set. But then I'm kind of wondering, isn't the entire sales environment as it's currently designed just not fucking shit? In plain English.
Like your question, is it or is it?
Yeah, is it?
What's your question exactly?
So is the environment just absolutely toxic and just counterproductive by design?
No, I mean, I've definitely learned a ton from being in sales, right? I've learned about myself. I've learned about different companies. All my managers have been great. And it's an exciting time. Working in sales is an exciting field, and people understand that you're going to make mistakes. I think it's more on a personal level. I think from the outside looking in, when you're a manager, you're actually not being you're being more hard on yourself than your manager is probably being on you. Now that said, in the US we have at-will employment, which at least in Israel that I've learned that it's not quite like that, where if you don't hit your sales targets, you're going to get fired. Yeah. That's just how it works. And in that nature, that's pretty cutthroat. But managers have been salespeople, right? They've been in the trenches just like you have, and they understand the grind. So the answer is, I don't think it's a toxic place. I just think people are focusing on the wrong things.
Okay.
And the right thing is human connection, human psychology. How am I going to make this person's day, as we talked about? How am I going to guide my client to making the best decisions for them? That should be top of mind, not a script.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And it seems, I mean, just from our conversation and, my understanding of how you've explained it, that developing emotional intelligence and developing a deeper understanding of human psychology, these things happening together are really complementary to each other. I mean, it's one thing just to understand yourself a bit better and be a bit more introspective and think back on, why did I do that? Or why did I say that? Or why did this happen? Sort of trace back, triggering events or moments where you could have done something different. But without the understanding of human psychology and sort of, for example, the fundamental attribution error, it can lead us to think, everything went wrong because I'm just crap at my job, or I just said the wrong thing, or I didn't do enough, rather than saying, well, maybe the environment played a bigger role than what I could see at the time. And okay, if under that assumption, how do I learn from this? And how does that change my perspective going forward?
And it's all related.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
that's what's fascinating. That's what excites me about the field. It's all related. As far as the meditation, I mean, how can you understand someone else's emotions if you can't even understand yours? How can you expect to change or improve someone's decision making if you can't even improve your own? That is where the meditation comes into play. That is where the self improvement comes into play, and also going back to school and learning as much as you can.
Yeah.
All that stems from that. Now, once you understand that, then it's time to actually live that life. One, you're living that life by you're improving people's behavior by just living, right? Just by making better decisions. That's gonna come across with other people automatically. That's the beauty of life. But also, now that you have all these tools, you can start teaching other people and using them and guiding everyone to making better decisions, and that includes customers and clients.
Yeah. It reminds me of a quote by the great RuPaul Charles: "If you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love somebody else?"
Amen.
Can I get an amen?
Yes, you can get an amen. It makes sense to me, but for me, because I'm a practical person, for the training that you would want to give, what is this actually going to look like?
So right now I have a session that mostly covers the tools, right? And I go into the session and say, hey, like, listen, I'm going to throw a lot at you. Ask questions along the way, of course, to get an understanding. But like, my main goal is for you just to perceive relationships in a different way. Going back to that base point of where you're starting from, and just tweaking that to be more human and saying, hey, it's okay to be vulnerable. That I think changes a lot of things, but I do cover tools. And I think, for example, the anchoring that I talked about, right? Your customers have reference points. They're constantly comparing your product to their expectations, to the status quo. The company has a current solution or whatever they're doing in place. Most salespeople don't lose sales due to competition. They lose to the status quo, right? The client just saying, no, I'm not going to do anything. So understanding that status quo is very important. It's your job as a salesperson to demonstrate why using your solution is better than the status quo. That's one aspect. Another aspect I really like is the inclusion versus exclusion model. So there's a great study by Levin, and he showed that basically you can increase revenue by going through an exclusion model versus an inclusion model, and I'll explain what that looks like. So with the inclusion model, you are starting off with the most basic product, and then the client is constantly adding features.
Okay.
When the exclusion model, which is more effective, you're starting off with the fully loaded product and the customer is removing features.
Sure.
Now, there's two reasons why this is effective. One, your reference point changes, right? The customer's anchor changes. Going with the exclusion model, the anchor is set at the fully loaded product, right? Which is more expensive.
Yeah.
But what the second point, what I really like, because I think the first point is almost like, okay, that's really good for the salesperson, but what's in it for the customer?
Yeah.
What I like about the second point, so you're flipping the psychology around in terms of what the customer is thinking about. With the inclusion model, right? You're starting off with the base level product. Each additional feature is a cost. We all know we hate losses. We're all loss averse. Your mind is focused on cost as the customer. Now, when you do the exclusion model and you start off with the fully loaded, well, each subtraction of a feature is not a cost. It's a loss in quality. So now you completely flip the psychology, and the customer is not thinking about cost, but is thinking about quality. What's best for the business? And just getting in that mindset. I mean, we're getting too, I believe that customers get too caught up in the cost of things, right? And staying within budget and whatnot, or not focused, not opening their minds to the quality.
It's quite important.
It is quite important. And listen, you're going to think about it no matter what, right? Like,
I hope so.
You have a budget, like, you're going to think about the cost, of course. But like, maybe cost shouldn't be the only thing you're thinking about, or it shouldn't be as important as you're making it seem, right? There's tons of value in the value beyond money, right? Like, I don't think people really think in terms of dollars and cents a lot, pretty frequently, but they're not thinking about some of the other intangibles, like account management once a product is bought, or what is the end once we have this product and people's jobs are easier. How much more positive energy is that going to create around my sales team or my company? So I think people are just too narrowly focused on cost when it comes to buying, and the exclusion model at least adds another variable to the equation.
I like it. Very powerful. Very powerful. So is that your vision for the future? Sort of, I mean, we always ask this question at the end of, it's kind of a big question of where do you see this all going? And I guess personally, what do you hope for yourself? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? The practice of behavioral science and training, behavioral science training within sales, and even more generally, like what's your hope for the future developments of behavioral science and the field?
Yeah, so it's a super exciting time to be in behavioral science and behavioral economics. As I think someone previously on your podcast said, it's the century of the brain, right? I think humanity is fed up of being so stressed all the time, and we want to get back to our humanity. And one way to do that is understanding emotions, understanding why we make decisions, understanding value beyond money. So I think those things are important, and people are starting to realize it. I mean, you have books like *Sapiens* coming out saying, "Hey, there's a lot more suicides than deaths to terrorism," but we're all caught up in terrorism, which obviously we should be. But like, why aren't we focused on suicides at all? I mean, I can't remember the last news story I heard about a suicide or when it came up in any type of conversation. So I think people's focus is expanding and focusing on more human aspects. So it's an exciting time. As far as what I plan on doing, this is actually, I do plan on starting my own consulting firm and training sales teams, training business professionals on how to increase emotional intelligence and apply behavioral economics to their jobs. But also, I'm happy to say this is one of the first times in my life where I don't have a narrowed agenda. I mean, I've grown up my whole entire life with, hey, I want to get into this school. I want to get this type of job. I want to make this amount of money. Right. And that's been running my life. And for the first time, I can't tell you what I'm going to be doing in 5 years. And that actually is super exciting in my mind.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, super freeing. And we're going to be watching your progress and keep track on, your developments. It's super exciting. You've convinced me for sure that this emotional intelligence and behavioral economics belong together. They're natural partners. So I'm really excited to see, how you progress and, where you'll end up in 5 years. I'm excited to see what directions to take. Yeah. Perfect. So, very last question. The listener has been with us for almost an hour. Where would you want to direct them to after this podcast? Is there something you'd like to plug? Feel free. This is your moment.
Yes. So, as I shared previously, I am obsessed with podcasts and have kept track of all my favorite ones and created my own playlist on Spotify called Behavioral Economics. It has over 1,050 subscribers right now, so it makes me happy that people are getting value out of it. Of course, questioning behavior episodes are on there.
Thank you.
All the best podcasts are on there from a behavioral science and economics standpoint, and I've listened to all of them.
Wow.
You asked me where I find the time, and that's why podcasts are so great. You can be walking around, and why not listen to a podcast? And then Twitter. So you could find me at Behavior 2020, which is my consulting business. And yeah, those are the two media outlets.
All right, we will make sure to link them down below so people can easily find you, which, like you said, should be pretty easy. Nick, thank you so much for making the time. I'm going to dive more into the application of behavioral science into sales. I think I'm going to read Cialdini again. It's been a while, so it's probably a good idea to reread them anyway. But yeah, thank you so much for making the time, and good luck with your masters and good luck with your company. I'm excited.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
So that was us talking to Nick Mishkin. So Nick, as always, thank you so much for making the time. I think it was a very, very interesting conversation. I have to admit, I'm surprised that there is so little behavioral application in sales thus far.
Yeah.
How about you, Sarah? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we've come across it before, right? With cyber security, but I think it's more surprising in this case because sales is so much about the human interaction and about speaking with and managing and influencing human behavior. That's what you need to do. You need to be able to good judge of character. So it's even more surprising that there is a lot less of this behavioral science influence. It seems so natural. So I think Nick has stumbled across an excellent gap in the market and also in terms of the knowledge market as well. So it's a super interesting topic, and I can definitely see how behavioral science can enhance the world of sales. So opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. But you have to admit, though, although apparently cold calling is the most effective method, it is also the most annoying method. Come on!
I know. It reminds me as well of the phishing emails that get sent out. Like, for the majority of people who receive those, it's not going to work cold calling. And I think you've got the extra element of catching people at the right moment, like something that's kind of outside of your control to a certain degree and kind of unobservable, which adds an extra layer of difficulty. But it's almost like it must be profitable for them to carry on doing it because it is such a high effort, low reward adventure. I can completely understand why people burn out of this industry, to be honest. It completely makes sense to me.
Absolutely. Do you think you'd be good at it?
No, not at all. I think you have to have a lot of perseverance, and I think you would have to be good at separating your self-worth from your outcomes. And I think in sales, a lot of the way that you get paid, like commission and things like that, there's so much pressure to just the thing that you're graded on is making that sale or not, which I think was something. I mean, Nick raised an interesting point that actually maybe we can change the goal, actually to why don't we just say that we're successful when the person we spoke to has walked away and had a positive experience, or we'll.
Yeah, but you're not a shrink.
No, but that's something that kind of came up this episode about, maybe learning how to apply behavioral science, even when it's applied to some sort of workplace or some sort of productivity or profitability. There's actually, the element where learning a bit of behavioral science and understanding a bit more about how your own mind works can actually have a lot of benefits, a lot of positive spillovers for the person applying the behavioral science in their own life, which is interesting. And I mean, I'm certainly very introspective, like sitting and reading about people's behavior all the time, reflecting on my own. I think that's kind of a natural thing to become a bit when you're going to academia. So yeah, that seems quite natural to me. Not sure. What about you?
I hope it works for him.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like after we've had this conversation, yeah, well, I mean, how do you want me to put it? After the conversation that we've had with Matt Wallard, which is probably not the right pronunciation of his name, but we've given up on that one. it's just a bit like behavioral science can do a lot of things, but behavioral science can't do a lot of things at the same time. Like you have to pick one objective and
Mm.
fully move on to that objective and design your policies that way. Like you can't do two things half-assed and expect good outcomes. So I think if you apply behavioral science to make a sale, you can still have the spillover effect that you've done this in such a way that the person buying into whatever you're offering um, feels or has the perception that they've gone through a good conversation and they've been heard and they've been listened to. But at the end of the day, this experience being positive, sure, but at the end of the day, it is about making the sale, and the spillover effect for, or it's probably not even as spillover effect. It's a means to an end. To give someone a positive experience is very clearly a means to an end for making the sale. At least that's how I see it.
Mm.
And then, to be quite frankly, if this is a very successful sales tactic, the spillover effect for the salesperson, and it might be a positive experience for the person that's buying into what you're offering, and that's perfectly all right. But to me, that's very much a means to an end, because giving someone a positive experience is very much, very likely to be a really good predictor of whether they are, buying into the sale. But then on the other hand, do I think this will naturally spill over into the salesperson having a better experience? I don't know. You might make more sales, but your conversations might be slightly more positive. You might have less, doors slammed in your face via,
Mm.
online or phone-based communications. But whether that is necessarily going to spill over into higher well-being, like it's very clearly not the point of whatever this intervention or this tactic or this tool is. So I find it difficult to make any real
Yeah,
hypotheses. I find it very difficult to build any real hypotheses on that, to draw any real conclusions from that. I wouldn't be very confident in making predictions about that. You can test it,
sure.
which I'm pretty sure is what Nick is doing, as he's mentioned before, because he did go back into education and he is interested in researching this. And I think it's very good research to do, because if there is actually an effect, that would be great. But I wouldn't bank on it personally.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I have a bit of a different opinion. I sort of, think even though the end goal of like, okay, you've identified what the problem is, and it's something to do with, not making enough sales, or it could be to do with staff turnover is too high within the company, and drilling in a little bit more, you can use behavioral science to actually figure out, okay, what is the actual problem or the actual behavior that we want to target that's going to make a difference. But I'm of the opinion that behavioral science can be a tool to help you understand why things didn't work the way you thought they would. We have preconceptions of, causality, and, if something goes wrong, like if you don't make the sale, why that happened. And I think behavioral science can offer an alternative perspective, almost like a third person perspective, a way of like shifting your perspective about, a negative interaction you had, or the fact that you didn't reach your sales for the month. A lot of it, I guess, is the attributional bias. Like if you become aware of attributional bias and think, okay, maybe when, for some people, when things go wrong, they're more likely to blame situational factors, right? They're more likely to make excuses and say, look, it was just everything else in the external environment went wrong, and that's what led to it, right? Like if you can understand a natural tendency to do that, you may also have people who are more likely to blame themselves when things go wrong as well, and be too hard on themselves when things were outside of their control. So that I do sort of take Nick's point that actually understanding the way the human brain works, even if the goal is to get that knowledge to help you, influence people's behavior in a better way, that knowledge you can also use on yourself to understand why you've thought of something, or why your brain has made a certain connection, and can give you like a bit of a third party. Although you have to be careful, because, even knowing about these biases doesn't mean that you don't have more biases or the same biases unconsciously, or that you're any better necessarily making decisions, but it just offers a new perspective, which is something I buy into. But I take your point completely about
Sure.
Behavioral science isn't cognitive therapy. There is a whole different field about
really.
that and about introspection. And so maybe behavioral science isn't the right tool if that is your goal, is to like, improve your mental health, for example. Maybe behavioral science isn't the right spanner for that job. But yes,
No, it's not the right spanner, but it's very obviously you can't really expect if your goal, if you have a very specific goal, which is not directly linked to improving mental well-being. I think mental well-being is such a complex concept that it is very difficult to have that as a spillover effect. But like I said, it might work. Who knows? And I think on that hypothesis that it may or may not work, which is a terrible hypothesis, Karl Popper is rolling in his grave. The father of falsification is just like, oh Lord, this is not what I died for. But yeah, guys, I hope you thought it was an entertaining, educational, or at least thought-provoking episode. We definitely had some interesting discussions, played a bit of devil's advocate, and learned a whole lot. So I would say it's a very, very good episode. As always, everything that was mentioned in the episode will be linked down below, so you can find everything easy, regardless of the platform that you're listening this on. And we hope to see you again next week. And we hope that the week leading up to our next episode will be a really good week for you. Bye, guys.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying. You're the one I love, you're the one I want.